The owner of the data here is one of the most important aspects of a data classification program. You have to know who that owner is. Ultimately, the business owners are probably the person who's most responsible for that data. But what you see frequently in companies is this battle between IT, security, and the business side of the house, be it business operations or whoever, about who owns the data. And everybody will point the finger at everybody else. Well, to address that, your data classification policy should say that IT and security, well, those are custodians of the data, but whoever created that data to begin with, they're the owner. They're the ones who know what that data is. They know the impact of the loss of that data, and they can speak to that. The IT guys and the security guys probably can't. But what you end up with then is a shared responsibility between the real owner of the data and the custodians or the users of it. And of course, everybody's responsible for the protection of that data, but again, one belly button for understanding what that data is, and that's the owner. So they essentially have final responsibility for data protection. They need to be able to define what the classification levels are of the information. They're responsible for marking that information as it gets created. They review that assignment, the classification assignment, as time goes by, and they make sure that, is this information still top secret? Or is it now just, unclassified information? And then data protection itself, they're the ones who say, okay, security, I need this level of protection on this, and I need your help to do this. Data retention gets into an interesting area because there are trade-offs between maintaining all this information in all these buckets and getting rid of it. And so you look at regulations sometimes require the fact that you create, once you create information, you have to retain it for a certain number of years. Like, tax documents, they say you ought to hold on to them for 7 years, I think it is. Just recognize the fact that there's competing priorities here. Regulation says I have to hold on to the data. My due diligence says I really ought to delete that data because I don't need it anymore, and I don't use it, and it's a risk to me by leaving it up there on the file server. So look at the trade-offs when you're considering storage, records retention, and controls around that. If you've got data at rest sitting on a file server somewhere, if you've got all that data sitting out there and you have a breach, the regulators might come in, or actually anybody might come in and say, why did you have all this data there? Now, the wisecrack would be because you, the regulator, told me to have it there, but that probably won't go over real well. So look at why you need to have this data there. If you do have to keep it for regulatory reasons, maybe you want to put it somewhere else. If you're not actively using it, but you have to keep it, why not burn it on a DVD and throw it on the shelf? Or write it to a hard drive, unplug the hard drive, and put it on the shelf. So there are all sorts of strategies for getting around this. Well, the regulator told me to, but I don't want to keep it. You don't have to keep it on an active system. You can archive it, and that works equally as well. So essentially, you need to make sure that your policy dictates, your data classification policy dictates, how do we deal with data that we have to retain for, e-discovery or, data retention requirements. This is a very interesting case study from the Compliance, Governance, and Oversight Council Summit. This was done by the COBIT organizers, ISACA. And they said that, okay, in any organization, typical organization, 1% of the information is on litigation hold, meaning it's being used for active investigation, or there's a court case, we have to hold on to it for that reason. 5% of that data is for retention, meaning we have a regulation or a law that says we have to hold on to this information for a certain amount of time. 25% of it has current business value, active projects, engineering schematics, things we're working on right now. I add all that up, you end up with 69% of the information out there that's sitting on your file servers has no intrinsic value to it. There's probably a significant chunk on that file server that you can get rid of because it has no business value. By deleting it, by moving it off to an archive server or something like that, you're reducing your attack space and reducing the potential for compromising information. There are several data retention regulations out there. The EC directive from 2009, this is essentially e-discovery. You have to trace and identify the source of the communication, who started it, where did it go to, what was the type of that communication, date and time of it as well. So that regulation is out there. SOX has one for financial reporting as well. SEC has their own. There are a lot of federal and state regulatory requirements. And then on top of all of this, you might have additional requirements as an organization, business process or business policy that says we have to hold on to this data because it's important for whatever reason. So what you're left with is, again, just kind of like the privacy morass. You have this big pile of data retention regulation that you might have to be in compliance with. And so you've got to navigate all that and say, all right, what do I need to keep? How long do I need to keep it? And then apply the security context to that. Where do I keep it? Can I do it here? Can I put it somewhere else, on an archive server, or can I just burn it to a disk or write it to tape and send it off to Iron Mountain or something like that? Some considerations if you're going to think about doing data retention yourself. There's always the cost of storage. With cost of storage getting so low now, it's almost irrelevant. But do think about, if I've got 6 terabytes of data to store, can I go out and buy a $1,000 SAN, put that in there and hold on to that information? Well, that probably is a much better idea than keeping 6 terabytes on your file server where anybody and everybody can get into it. Think about your risk from continuity perspective. If you've got to retain records, are you keeping multiple copies of it if it is really that important? And then think about the inherent aggregation. If I've got all of this data sitting out somewhere, can I pull together my project files that I've archived from 2 years ago, combine it with something innocuous that I found today, and come up with a bigger picture of what you're actually doing, or a more sensitive picture of that? Think about who owns the retained data, who's doing the inventory process on that. Think about, okay, I've got to have access to this archive somewhere. How do I do that? Does it have to go through legal? Is there a process in place that I have to meet to get access to that data? Maybe there are contractual obligations as well that you have to account for, and things like specific company or specific business unit or business line needs that have to be met as well. So finally, I'll leave you with this slide that says data retention policy content. Some of the things that you might want to consider here are, again, why do you have this policy? What are the categories? Who assigns those categories? Who the data owner is? What is the process for assigning categories to data? How do you make sure that data has a particular category assigned to it or classification assigned to it? Who's involved in this process? And then how do you make sure that you're actually meeting your retention requirements for whatever the time frame might be? So all of that information, there's a reason this list is so big. It's because data retention's not kind of like privacy, it's a sticky subject if you don't navigate it well. But make sure that your data retention policy has all of these areas in it.